Right now, social service providers are part of a community. They're trusted, accessible, they're seen as independent. But there is a change in the requirement to provide individual client level data. So what the fear that people fleeing violent relationships or in financial need may be scared of seeking help in case their disclosures are used to take their kids off them, stop arrest or their benefits. What do you make of this issue of handing over data in exchange for funding?
Okay, so I just listening to you unpacking more about your question. Straight away, I see it as being a real risk to the person that this data is collected on and a risk to their family. I think that personally, I would be really concerned about where that data is going to, how many people get access to it. When you talk about domestic violence and the data being handed over with women, I know that they are fearful. I know that they fear that this information may be used down the line when they fix what's going on with their lives, they want to go out and work in the workforce, that this data collected is actually going to hinder getting them into full-time employment or part-time employment. So I've had a few discussions, not a lot to be honest with you, but I do fear that the use of that data for money, the use of collecting data for money seems really wrong.
Well, I think this government's really the first government that's ever tried to effectively use data to measure stuff. So there's two different issues because it's a slightly different issue. So we're the first government that's really used data as a measurement tool. And I think if you look at any business practice of the world, really, they use an extreme amount of data. Now, the second issue, which is the issue you just raised, is much more complicated, and interestingly, a number of bits of legislation have gone through Parliament in recent months. This has been a very significant consideration, and you've only got to look at our athletes having all their information made available through whatever you call that stuff they do on these modern things. It's obviously an extremely dangerous topic for us to deal with.
I know what you're talking about, I understand where you come from, but think of the dangers.
That's the point I just raised.
Think of the ramifications.
And I think there's potential danger in that we don't fully understand.
We'll have to grant first.
There are two different things though, aren't there, Ian? One between hacking, which is one thing, and the government deciding that it will only give money to a group of people if they hand over information about the people that they're servicing. Those are two totally unrelated things. The latter does concern me actually at the front end, Wallace, the end at which people go to access the services, and the fact that everyone in this room will know people that you work with who will be put off from accessing a service if they know that that information is...
Is that true?
Yes.
And so that's the problem with it.
Right.
I've actually got a much bigger problem, which is Ian's right to one extent about data. The National didn't invent the capture of data and use of it for anything else, but he is right about this. They are using that data in a different way. And this is for their hyper-targeted so-called social investment program. And I actually think that's the bigger issue. Data is great. Data is really useful. It can inform decision-making really well. It's not the only thing. And if it's used for this obsessive targeting, it actually is a negative. The point is you can do anonymized data. There's all sorts of things you can do with data. But also, remember the first thing you said, funding is linked to this. That's not the same thing as saying we're going to capture data, we're going to use it for...
Marama first and then Jan on this.
All right, so not only is funding determined on this data, but sanctions for your clients are determined by this data. Now, the theory is that if we have specific information and information sharing, and to be honest, there are a lot of organisations that would have said, gee, if I'd known this, if we can get together. Look, the basis of whānau ora is that we have a joined up unified plan by all the different providers, and that would require some portion of data sharing or information, but not for funding. It's for the client benefit. So if we have individualised targeted responses to people, I don't have a problem with that. If the relevant agencies involved come together to devise a plan called whānau ora, and this is with all the okay of the person involved. But when we're using that individual data, one for funding, two for sanctioning of people, and three for branding people because the current gang action plan I absolutely disagree with, because it says here's a gang member who is now an organised criminal. Here are the wives of those gang members who must be victims of abuse and violence, so we'll break them up. And here are the children who must be vulnerable because they sit inside these families. And drawing the affiliation of gang members is a whakapapa. And you've just painted them all with the same brush, and you've called that information risk profiling, data sharing. And so I'm nervous and worried about the way in which it's used, but I do think that you would agree as well, I would think, that a level of sharing of information for the benefit of the individual is what we have asked for a long time. But the way it's been used here in this investment, social investment approach, I think has gone too far.
So, trying to keep it brief. I mean, for me, the starting point has to be acknowledging the deep pain and irony of the government emphasising data when the disability community in particular has been trying for years to get some population-based data, and the government is still not doing it. And now here it is when they've come up with this new fancy model to be able to limit their funding. Here it's data's everything. So I think that has to be acknowledged. And I do want to point that point around this is being linked to funding. So I have real concerns that, say, as an example of, say, a women's refuge, if they are reporting back their data and it turns out that they're mostly working with middle class women, and the government have said clearly that their target is people who've had experience with child use and family, they're on a benefit, they've been in touch with prison. Those middle class women, if they don't meet that target areas, are they going to stop funding those agencies for working with them?
Right.
Like, are we limiting our society in terms of our concepts of social support systems to when everything's gone horribly wrong already? Like, we're in massive danger of breaking down our entire system, and it's not strengths-based.
Okay.